Joseph Stalin. Just the name. It brings up these really powerful, often conflicting images, doesn't it? Was he the architect who built a superpower? Or was he a monstrous tyrant? That's the huge question we're going to try and unpack today. I mean, look at this. On one hand, you've got the architect, the guy who dragged a poor agrarian country into the industrial age, building a military machine that would literally crush Nazi Germany. But then on the other hand, you have the author of mass terror, a man who was responsible for man-made famines, vicious purges, and a network of labor camps that consumed millions of lives. How can one person be both? So, who was the real Joseph Stalin? To even start to figure that out, we've got to go way back to the beginning to see what created the man who would change the world. And his path to power, well, it started in a place you would never, ever expect. We're going to look at how a young seminary student became the infamous Man of Steel. He wasn't born Stalin. His name was Ioseb Jugavashvili, born in 1878 to a pretty poor family in Georgia. It wasn't until 1912 that he took on the name Stalin. It comes from the Russian word for steel, Stal. And that name, Man of Steel, wow, it would come to define his rule in the most chilling way possible. This timeline really shows you just how fast he moved from being an outsider to a major player. He drops out of seminary, he's organizing violent bank robberies for the cause, he's editing the party newspaper. But look at that last one, 1922. He's made general secretary. Now, that sounds like a boring desk job, right? Wrong. It was the absolute key to his power. It let him control all party appointments, so he could slowly, quietly stack the entire government with people loyal only to him. And this right here, this was one of his most important tools. This is the first issue of Pravda. It literally means truth, which is pretty ironic, all things considered. As the editor, Stalin wasn't just some backroom planner. He was actively shaping the party's message, controlling the story, and building his own power base long before anyone knew what was happening. Okay, so let's tackle that first side of the coin, Stalin, the nation builder. This is the story of how the Soviet Union was hammered into a superpower, pretty much through sheer force of will. To really get the sheer brutality of what came next, you have to understand the mindset. He was desperate. In 1931, Stalin said this: "We have fallen behind the advanced countries by 50 to 100 years. We must close that gap in 10 years. Either we do this or we'll be crushed." So for him, this wasn't just about progress. It was about the literal survival of his nation. So how do you close a 100-year gap in 10 years? His answer was the 5-year plans. And they were a brutal 3-part assault. First, forced collectivization. The state just seized all private farms. Second, a breakneck push for heavy industry, new mines, new factories, whole new cities. And third, a centralized command economy where the government called all the shots. And to get the manpower for all this, millions of people, branded as enemies, were shipped off to the gulags. This whole thing was powered by terror and, frankly, slave labor. And all that industrial power, built so fast and at such a horrific cost, well, it had a very clear purpose. When the Nazis invaded in 1941, Stalin took over as commander-in-chief. It was the Red Army that stopped the invasion, pushed them all the way back, and finally took Berlin. This victory is what put the Soviet Union on the map as a global superpower, one of the 2 left standing after the war. And nothing, I mean nothing, symbolizes that victory and the insane cost better than the city that was literally named after him. This is what Stalingrad looked like after it was liberated. The battle was one of the deadliest in all of human history, but the Soviet win here, that was it. That was the definitive turning point of the war on the Eastern Front. But, and this is a huge but, for every factory that went up, for every battle won, the human cost was just staggering. And that brings us to the other, much darker side of the story, the terror and the purges that defined his rule. Just take a second and let this number sink in. 18 million. That's how many people are thought to have been sent through the gulag system of forced labor camps. That's a scale of human suffering that's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. This map shows you the direct line between his economic policies and mass death. These are the areas hit by the massive famine of 1932-33, a famine that killed as many as 7 million people. This was not a natural disaster. It was a direct result of that forced collectivization policy we talked about, a man-made catastrophe that was especially horrific in Ukraine, where it's known as the Holodomor. And the terror wasn't random. It was systematic. Dekulakization was the nice-sounding term for wiping out millions of successful peasants. The Great Purge was about hunting down and executing hundreds of thousands of political opponents, real or imagined. Entire ethnic groups were accused of treason and just shipped off from their homelands. And then you had the famous show trials, where his oldest comrades were publicly humiliated and then executed. The destruction wasn't just aimed at people. It was an attack on culture, on spirit itself. Here you can see Moscow's Cathedral of Christ the Savior being blown up with dynamite in 1931. This was just one part of a huge, state-run campaign to crush religion, an attempt to just erase centuries of faith and tradition from memory. And here's the crazy part. The warning signs? They were there right from the start. Even Vladimir Lenin, the guy who started the whole revolution, saw the danger. In his final political testament from 1923, he wrote that Stalin was too crude and told his comrades they needed to find a way to remove him. But that warning, it was ignored. So, all of this brings us right back to where we started. After seeing all of that, let's explore why his legacy is still so fiercely debated to this day. Today, how he's remembered is completely split down the middle. For some, especially in places like Russia and his home country of Georgia, he's still seen as the tough, victorious leader who modernized the nation. But for most of the world, and especially for the families of his countless victims, he is condemned as a monstrous tyrant, the very face of totalitarianism and unbelievable suffering. The official takedown of his legacy started almost the second he was gone. After he died in 1953, his own successor, Nikita Khrushchev, launched this shocking campaign of de-Stalinization. He went public, denouncing Stalin's brutal rule and the creepy personality cult that had been built around him. Which leaves us with this final, really difficult question. How is history supposed to judge a leader who built and destroyed on such an unbelievable scale? Architect or tyrant? Maybe the most terrifying answer of all is that he wasn't one or the other. He was, somehow, undeniably, both.